Every gym has a mission statement. Community. Respect. Family. It and oppos. S printed on the waiver you sign before your first class. Stitched into the rash guards they sell at the front desk. Painted in vinyl letters above the mats where everyone can see it and nobody has to live by it. Ironclad Jiu-Jitsu had all three words on its wall. Community. Respect. Family. What it actually had was a hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy, like at the top of most hierarchies, sat a man who had learned that rank was a permission slip. This ISN and oppos. TA story about martial arts. It and oppos. S a story about what happens when the permission slip gets torn up in front of everyone who was too scared to do it themselves. Maya Ortiz had been coming to Ironclad 3 nights a week for 14 months. She worked the day shift at a pediatric dental office, cleaning tiny teeth and handing out stickers to kids who cried anyway, and 3 nights a week she drove across town, changed in the cramped women and oppos' locker room that smelled like old rubber mats and cheap deodorant, and walked out onto the canvas to get folded, twisted, and occasionally strangled by people twice her size. She wasn't an oppos' good at it, not by the gym and oppos' metrics. She was a 2-stripe white belt closing in on blue 5'4", 120 pounds after a big lunch. What she had instead of size was stubbornness. She and oppos' started training after a breakup that left her feeling like something that could be pushed around, and jiu-jitsu was the first thing in years that made her feel like she couldn't and oppos' not because she was strong but because she was learning to be hard to move. She was good at surviving. She wasn't an oppos' good at being believed when she said something was wrong. Reese Calloway noticed her the way you notice weather changing, not all at once but as a pattern. Reese had been assistant coaching the Tuesday night fundamentals class for about 2 months, filling in a favor for the head instructor, a woman named Colleen who in oppos' blown out her knee and needed someone to run drills while she recovered. Reese wasn't an oppos' technically staff. She trained there because it was close to her apartment and because after 11 years doing things with her body that she didn't and oppos' talk about at dinner parties, jiu-jitsu was one of the only physical disciplines that still felt honest to her, pure problem-solving, no politics, no chain of command. That was the theory anyway. Ironclad had plenty of politics. Just kept them quiet. The pattern Reese noticed was this. A heavyset brown belt named Trent Kessler, who trained 4 nights a week and never once showed up to open mat sparring against anyone his own size, always seemed to end up partnered with the smallest, newest, most inexperienced people in the room. And when he did, class stopped looking like practice and started looking like something else. Reese had asked Colleen about it once carefully, in the way you ask about something you already suspect the answer to. And quote, Trent and oppos' intense and quote, Colleen had said, not quite meeting her eyes. And quote, he trains hard. Some people don and oppos' like training with him. He and oppos' never actually hurt anybody bad enough to file anything so. End quote. She and oppos' shrugged, the particular shrug of someone who has decided a problem is somebody else and oppos' to solve or nobody and oppos' end quote. He also brought in like 6 new members this year. Refers people from his gym in Bakersfield. Owner likes him. End quote. That was the whole explanation, really compressed into 40 words. He pays and he recruits, so we look away. Reese had heard versions of that sentence in a dozen contexts that had nothing to do with martial arts. It was the sound an institution made when it had decided a person and oppos' usefulness outweighed the damage he did on the way to being useful. She and oppos' filed it away and kept training, kept half watching because watching was what she was built to do, and because she didn't and oppos' yet have a reason to do anything else. The reason arrived on a Thursday in October. Class was rolling, 6-minute rounds, partners rotating on the whistle. Maya had just finished a round with another white belt, both of them gassed and grinning when Trent and oppos' voice cut across the mat. And quote, Ortiz, you and oppos' with me. And quote, it wasn't an oppos' a request. It was never a request. Maya and oppos' stomach did the small cold drop it always did when this happened, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, often enough to dread, not often enough to complain about without sounding paranoid. She and oppos' mentioned it to a training partner once. Trent goes really hard with me, and gotten back a shrug and a and quote, yeah he and oppos' like that with everybody and quote, which wasn't and oppos' true but which was easier for both of them to believe than the alternative. And quote, sure and quote, she said because sure was easier than no. And because she still, after 14 months, hadn't and oppos, T figured out how to say no to a brown belt in a room that had decided brown belts didn't and oppos. T need to be told no. They slapped hands. The whistle blew. Trent didn't and oppos. T warm into it. He never did. Within seconds he and oppos. D shoved through her guard using nothing but the 80 pounds he had on her, dropped his chest onto hers hard enough to drive the air out of her lungs in one short bark, and started working with the unhurried, contemptuous patience of a man who has already decided how the next 4 minutes will go. He wasn't an oppos T training her. He was demonstrating something to a room he and oppos, D already decided wasn't an oppos, T watching closely enough to matter. He isolated her arm. He climbed to mount. When she bridged, he rode it out lazily, barely shifting his weight, and she felt something close to despair at how little her best effort seemed to register on him at all. Then his forearm slid across her throat, and his other hand grabbed her collar, and the choke came on all at once and much too tight. Maya and Oppo's hand found the mat immediately. Tap tap tap. The pressure didn't and Oppo's ease. If anything it sharpened, his elbow drawing in, his weight settling deeper into the lock. She tapped again, harder, a full slap that should have been unmistakable in a room where 40 people were technically listening for exactly that sound. Trent held it. What happened in her body over the next several seconds happened fast and then seemed to stretch out forever the way accidents do. The rushing static that fills your ears when your carotids are compressed. The bright, absurd panic of an animal whose air has simply stopped, a panic that has nothing to do with technique or belts or gym culture, and everything to do with several 100,000 years of evolution screaming that this is how dying starts. Her hand kept slapping the mat, an instinct outliving the coordination behind it, her legs kicking uselessly at nothing. The gray came in from the edges. Then it wasn't an Oppo's gray anymore. When she came back, it was to the ordinary sounds of a gym, the hum of the HVAC, someone and Oppo's sneakers squeaking 2 mats over, a whistle blowing to end a round that had nothing to do with her, and to Trent already standing, already readying his belt, looking down at her with an expression that had settled into something like disappointment. And quote, "You got a tap earlier," end quote, he said at a volume clearly intended for the room. End quote. In a real fight nobody and Oppo's gonna stop for you, end quote. Maya rolled onto her side and coughed. A deep tearing cough that felt like it started somewhere below her sternum. Her vision kept swimming at the edges. Her throat throbbed with a bruised, swollen ache that she would still feel 3 days later every time she swallowed. Somewhere in the fog she registered that she had, in fact, tapped early, tapped clearly, tapped exactly the way 4 instructors over 14 months had taught her to, and that none of it had mattered because the man holding the choke had decided it wouldn't and Oppo's. Around her, the room did what rooms like this one had learned to do. Pairs kept rolling. A few heads turned, took in the scene, and turned back to their own rounds with the particular speed of people who have decided that noticing is its own liability. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she was okay. A blue belt 2 mats over, a woman Maya had chatted with in the parking lot more than once, looked directly at her for a full second, and then looked down at the canvas like it had said something interesting. That was the part that would stay with Maya longest, longer even than the throb in her throat. Not that Trent had done it. She and Oppo's half known in the deniable way people know things they don't and Oppo's have the standing to say out loud that something like this was coming eventually. What surprised her, what she turned over for weeks afterward, was how completely the room had agreed, in real time and without a word passing between them, to let it happen. And quote, "Who and Oppo's next?" End quote, Trent said, already scanning for his next partner, cracking his knuckles like a man clearing his throat before a speech. End quote, "Me." End quote. The voice wasn't an Oppo's loud. It didn't an Oppo's need to be. It came from the row of folding chairs by the cubbies, where Reese had been sitting for the last 10 minutes doing exactly what she always did during open rolling, watching, mostly quiet, occasionally correcting a white belt and Oppo's grip when Colleen and Oppo's assistant coach duties called for it. She stood up. She was not in a GI. She and Oppo's come straight from a 12-hour shift and hadn't and Oppo's planned on training tonight at all. She was here because Colleen had asked her to keep an eye on fundamentals while she iced her knee in the back office, and because Reese and Oppo's apartment 3 blocks away didn't and Oppo's have anything in it that felt like a reason to go home yet. She crossed the mat in a plain black long sleeve and leggings, barefoot, unhurried, and knelt beside Maya first. Not Trent, not the room, Maya. And checked her pupils with 2 fingers under her chin, tilting her face gently toward the light. End quote, look at me. Follow my finger. End quote, Maya and Apos. Eyes tracked, slow but present. End quote, good. You and Apos re okay. You and Apos re going to feel like garbage for a couple days, your throat and Apos, going to be sore. And if you get a headache that doesn't in Apos, go away, or you feel dizzy again, you go to urgent care, not home. Understand? End quote. Maya nodded, throat too raw to answer. Only then did Reese stand and turn to Trent. End quote. You held that for 3 seconds after she tapped, end quote, she said. Flat. Not a question. Trent and Apos' smirk had faltered for exactly as long as it took him to remember he had an audience. End quote, it and Apos' a contact sport. People get caught in transition. Maybe, end quote, a glance around the room playing to it, end quote. Maybe she and Apos' not ready for live rolling if she can, and Apos' handle getting caught, end quote. End quote, she tapped, end quote. Reese said again, the same flat register. End quote, you felt it. I watched you feel it and keep going. End quote. End quote, you gonna lecture me or you gonna roll? End quote, Trent said, and there it was, the thing men like Trent always reach for once they and Apos' been named, which was a dare, because a dare let them turn the conversation from what did you do to what are you willing to do about it, a frame they were used to winning. End quote, roll, end quote, Reese said. Here is the part of the story people usually want more of, and the part I and Apos' am going to give you less of on purpose. Reese Calloway had spent 9 years as a combat medic attached to a special operations support unit, the kind of job that exists on paperwork as logistics and medical support and exists in reality as something considerably less boring. She had, in that time, learned 2 overlapping skill sets: how to keep a human body alive under conditions engineered to end it, and because in her line of work those 2 things turned out to be closer neighbors than most people assume, precisely how a human body stops working joint by joint, breath by breath, and how little effort it actually takes to get there once you understand the mechanics instead of just the aggression. She didn't and Apos' talk about the specifics. Not because they were secret exactly, though some of them were, but because she and Apos' learned that the specifics didn't and Apos' actually help anyone understand her better. They just gave people a story to tell about her that had very little to do with who she and Apos' become since. What mattered for tonight and Apos' purposes was simpler. She and Apos' been trained by people whose entire profession was violence conducted with total efficiency and zero ego, and after 9 years around men who could kill you without raising their heart rate, a gym bully with a black belt and an audience did not register to her as dangerous. He registered as loud. She and Apos' started training jiu-jitsu 2 years ago after she got out on the advice of a VA counselor who and Apos' said, not unkindly, that she needed something that used her body the way her body had been trained to be used, but without a mission attached to it. Something that was just hers. It had mostly worked. Ironclad had, until tonight, been the one place in her new civilian life that felt uncomplicated. She hadn't and Apos' planned on that changing tonight. But plans, in her experience, were something you had until the moment they became a story you told afterward about what you and Apos' meant to do. The whistle blew. Trent didn't and Apos' wait for it to finish. He came in hard, exactly the way he and Apos' come in on Maya, reaching for a collar tie to snap her head down and set the tone early. Reese didn't and Apos' backpedal and didn't and Apos' fight the grip. She let him take it, stepped inside the arc of his reach instead of away from it, and in the half-second his weight committed forward, she was already gone from where he expected her to be, underhook buried deep in his armpit, her other hand cupping his tricep, her hips dropping under his belt line in one continuous motion that had nothing showy about it and didn't and Apos' need to. Trent and Apos' 210 pounds left the ground. He came down flat on his back hard enough that the sound of it, a heavy percussive crack of canvas absorbing a body that didn't and Apos' want to be thrown, silenced the 2 nearest mats before the crowd even fully registered what they and Apos' seen. She didn't and Apos' celebrate it. She was already moving, bypassing his guard entirely, dropping into side control with her shoulder driving his jaw sideways into a crossface that turned his head to the wall and took away, in one motion, both his vision of what she was doing and his ability to frame against her. She didn't and oppose. T ride high the way sport grapplers do, chasing points and angles. She sank low, heavy, entirely unbothered by the thrashing beneath her, because heaviness wasn't an oppose. T something she was doing to him. It was just what happened when someone stopped fighting gravity and let it work for them instead of against them. End quote. Get off, end quote. Trent gasped, already reddening, already discovering that the man beneath him, because in every way that mattered right now, he was beneath her, had access to leverage principles his 4 years of expensive black belt taught technique had somehow never quite covered, because those principles are typically saved for students an instructor respects enough to actually push. Reese stripped his framing arm, pinned his wrist under her knee, and shifted her weight until her sternum sat directly over his diaphragm, not choking him, not yet, just taking the inch of air his lungs needed every time he tried to refill them. It and oppose. S a detail worth knowing if you ever wonder how someone can be pinned without being choked at all. The diaphragm needs room to descend to pull air in, and if something heavy and immovable is parked on top of it, the room simply isn and oppose. T there. No hands on the throat required. Just weight, patience, and an understanding of where the body and oppose S actual weak points are, which have very little to do with where the throat happens to be. It took about 40 seconds for panic to arrive, the same 40 seconds it had taken for Maya, though Trent didn't and oppose. T know that comparison was being made and wooden and oppose. T have appreciated it if he had. He bucked, thrashed, burned oxygen he no longer had a surplus of. In his desperation he extended his right arm to shove her face away, the same mistake every panicking grappler makes, offering the one limb that shouldn't and oppose. TB offered, and Reese caught the wrist, swept her leg over his face, and locked a straight armbar with the same unhurried economy she and oppose D used for everything else tonight. She didn't and oppose. T crank it. The joint was straight, the tendons at their limit, one more inch from something that doesn't and oppose. T come back from a fold and a physical therapist. Trent and oppose. S freehand hit the mat. Tap tap tap. Reese held it. 1 second. 2. Trent and oppose. S voice cracked into something high and raw, and quote, asterisk tap. I tap, let go. Asterisk and quote. And the room, which had gone dead silent, seemed to lean into that silence even further, because everyone there understood exactly what was happening, understood it because they and oppose D all just watched it happen to Maya 20 minutes earlier and said nothing. 3 seconds. Reese let go. She didn't and oppose. T say the line people expect here, the mirrored taunt, the now you know how it feels, she and oppose. D thought about it. Some old tired part of her wanted to say it, wanted the room to hear the echo, and decided against it because the point wasn't and oppose T to make Trent feel what Maya felt. The point was never about Trent and oppose S feelings at all. She stood, stepped back, and looked down at him with an expression that had nothing triumphant in it, nothing performed. And quote, that and oppose S what 3 extra seconds feels like, end quote. She said, quiet enough that only the front row really caught it. End quote. Now you know what you did to her. End quote. The silence that followed wasn't an oppose T the ordinary silence of a room between rounds. It had weight to it, the specific density of 30-odd people simultaneously realizing they and oppose D been complicit in something and trying to work out in real time what that meant for how they and oppose D think of themselves tomorrow. Trent scrambled backward against the wall, cradling his arm, chest heaving, humiliation flooding in fast behind the fear to fill the space it left. His ego, the only currency that had ever mattered on these mats, was bleeding out in front of an audience that had watched him inflict something, and then be handed it back in under a minute. End quote. You cranked it, end quote. He spat, voice shaking with something that wanted very badly to sound like outrage instead of panic. End quote. That and oppose S assault. I could call the cops right now. End quote. Reese didn't and oppose T moved toward him. End quote. Call them, end quote, she said. End quote. Tell them you held a blood choke on a 120-pound woman for 4 seconds after she tapped, in front of 40 witnesses, because your feelings were hurt when I called it out. I and oppose LL wait. End quote. Trent looked around the room for backup. The training partners who usually laughed at his jokes, the guys who and oppose D bought protein powder off him, anyone, and found the floor mats had become, collectively, the most interesting surface in the building. Not one person met his eyes. That was when the office door opened and Marcus Diallo, ironclad and oppose S owner, came out fast, the way people move when they and oppose V heard something crash and are trying to get ahead of a problem before it becomes a bigger one. Marcus was in his late 40s, thickly built, a black belt himself, 4 stripes deep on a belt gone gray at the edges from a decade of use. He took in the scene in about 2 seconds, Maya against the wall with her hand at her throat, Trent nursing an arm against the padding, a woman he vaguely recognized as Colleen and Apo's fill-in coach standing in the center of his mats with an expression he couldn't and Apo's quite read. Marcus knew exactly what Trent was. Every head coach in every gym in the country knows exactly what their Trents are. It and Apo's not a mystery that requires investigation. What requires investigation if you and Apo's being honest with yourself is why you keep them around anyway. And Marcus already knew the honest answer to that. The same answer Colleen had given Reese 2 months earlier. Trent brought in members. Trent paid on time, paid for the expensive gear, referred his gym buddies from 2 towns over. In the unglamorous math of running a business in a strip mall between a nail salon and a check-cashing place, a paying customer and Apo's behavior gets more benefit of the doubt than an instructor and Apo's conscience can comfortably justify, and most owners find a way to live with that trade for years before anything forces the bill due. Tonight the bill was due. End quote. What happened here? End quote. Marcus said, already knowing, already dreading the answer, already calculating what it would cost him either way. End quote. Ask her. End quote. Reese said, nodding at Maya. End quote. Or Don and Apo's, T and I and Apo's. LL tell the State Athletic Commission and Apo's complaint line myself along with whichever review sites your gym is listed on, and let them ask instead. End quote. It wasn't an Apo's TA threat delivered with heat. It was delivered the way she and Apo's delivered everything tonight, as a fact about what was going to happen next, offered to Marcus as a courtesy in case he wanted to get ahead of it. Marcus and Apo's jaw worked. 20 years of ownership of memorized deflections, contact sport, accidents happen if she can, and Apo's handle the pressure, rose up in him out of pure habit, and he actually opened his mouth around the first few words of it before he looked again at Maya, at the bruise already blooming under her jaw, and stopped. To his very small credit, and it should be said plainly because it and Apo's rarer than it should be, he didn't and Apo's finish the sentence. He closed his mouth, looked at Trent and said in a voice gone suddenly tired, end quote, get your bag. We and Apo's LL talk tomorrow. End quote. It wasn't an Apo's justice. It wasn't an Apo's even close to justice, not yet. But it was the first time in 3 years that Marcus Diallo had chosen, in the moment, not to protect the man who paid his rent. Reese didn't and Apo's go home that night without doing 3 things, and I and Apo's including them because they and Apo's read the part most versions of this story skip, and skipping them is exactly how gyms like Ironclad get to keep having Trents in them. First, she sat with Maya in the parking lot for 40 minutes while Maya and Apo's hands stopped shaking enough to drive, and she wrote her own name and number on the back of a gym flyer, along with the words, if your throat still hurts tomorrow, or you get a headache, go to urgent care and tell them exactly what happened, get it on paper. Not because she expected anything legal to come of it, but because injuries that exist only in memory have a way of becoming easier for institutions to argue. Didn't and Apo's happen, and injuries that exist on a medical chart Don and Apo's Second, she called Colleen that night, woke her up doing it, and told her everything. Not as gossip but as a report, methodical and specific, times and holds and who and Apo's been standing where. Colleen, to her credit, didn't and Apo's ask Reese to keep it quiet. She asked when the next board meeting for the gym and Apo's ownership group was, because it turned out Marcus wasn't and Apo's the sole owner. There was a small group of investors, one of whom was a lawyer, and Colleen had been waiting 2 years for a reason with enough weight behind it to bring to them. Third, and this was the part that cost her something, the part she thought about longest driving home, she filed a written statement with the same state grappling federation whose patch was sewn onto Trent and Apo's SGI, the organization that sanctioned the regional tournaments he competed in and cared, at least on paper, about conduct violations. She didn't and Apo's do it because she believed it would end his career. She did it because she and Apo's spent 9 years learning that silence is a renewable resource for people who benefit from it, and that the only thing that ever actually interrupts that renewal is somebody putting their name on the record in writing where it can, and Apo's quietly evaporate the way a rumor can. Nothing happened to Trent immediately, which is worth saying honestly, because stories like this one like to pretend consequences arrive in a single dramatic night and then everyone goes home clean. That ISN and oppos. How institutions work, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to anyone actually trying to hold one accountable. What happened instead was slower and, in its way, more thorough. Two other students, once they saw Maya and Oppos' statement and Reese and Oppos' report Warren and Oppos' going to simply vanish into the gym, and Oppos' usual silence, came forward with their own versions of nights that had gone the same way. A smaller guy Trent had, end quote, accidentally, end quote, broken a rib on 18 months earlier, quietly settled with a training fee refund and an unspoken agreement not to talk about it. A teenage girl in the youth program whose mother had pulled her out after a class Trent had subbed for, never fully explaining why, though everyone who and Oppos' been paying attention had a guess. Marcus and Oppos' investors, once they had 3 documented incidents instead of 1 rumor, didn't, and Oppos' need much convincing. Trent and Oppos' membership was terminated within the month, quietly, through a letter rather than a scene, which was its own kind of injustice. The men who cause the loudest damage often get the quietest exits, but an exit is an exit. He resurfaced 8 months later at a gym 2 towns over, and Reese heard, through the same grapevine that carries everything eventually, that he lasted 11 months there before a similar pattern started again, and a similar reckoning followed, faster this time, because word travels between gyms the way it travels everywhere else once somebody and Oppos' finally willing to say it out loud. Ironclad itself survived, changed. Colleen took over as full head instructor within the year. Marcus stepped back to a business-only role, which everyone privately understood to be a face-saving demotion, and one of the first things Colleen did was rewrite the gym and Oppos' rolling policy. Mandatory tap acknowledgement, a standing rule that any instructor or senior belt who held a submission after a clear tap, verbal or physical, would be suspended from live rolling pending review. It and Oppos' policy plenty of gyms already had on paper and never enforced. Ironclad started actually enforcing it because now there was a paper trail proving what happened when you didn't, and Oppos' None of this made the 6 weeks after that Thursday easy for Maya. Her throat healed in days, the rest took longer. She stopped training for almost a month, unsure whether she wanted anything to do with the room that had watched her get hurt and looked away. What brought her back in the end wasn't and Oppos' dramatic. It was Reese texting her twice a week, not with pep talks, just logistics, fundamentals class Tuesday if you want it, no pressure, I and Oppos' I'll be there either way, until one Tuesday Maya showed up and nobody made a thing of it, and that turned out to be exactly what she needed, to walk back onto a mat and have it be ordinary again. She got her blue belt 11 months later. Reese was the one who tied it on her in front of the whole gym, and for once the applause in the room wasn't and Oppos' for size or aggression or the theater of dominance. It was for someone who and Oppos' been choked unconscious by a man twice her weight and come back anyway, on her own terms at her own pace, and nobody in that room needed it explained to them why that mattered more than a takedown ever could. It would be tidy to end there, with the blue belt ceremony, the policy change, the quiet justice of Trent and Oppos' career unraveling 2 towns over. Tidy SN and Oppos' quite honest though. What people who watched that Thursday night never saw, because it happened 3 hours later in an empty apartment, was Reese sitting on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, hands still faintly trembling in a way that had nothing to do with exertion, because holding an armbar on a man and Oppos' elbow while he screamed to be let go had put her, for 4 unwanted seconds, back in a version of herself she and Oppos' spent 2 years trying to set down. She hadn't an Oppos' hurt Trent. She and Oppos' been in complete control the entire round, had never once been in danger of causing real damage, had done exactly what she meant to do and stopped exactly when she meant to stop. That control was the whole point. But control, it turns out, ISN and Oppos' the same thing as being unaffected. She and Oppos' learned in 9 years of service precisely how to make her body a tool for ending a threat with total efficiency, and precisely how little that skill has to do with the ordinary human wiring that responds to holding someone and Oppos' suffering in your hands, even briefly, even for good reason. She sat on that floor for a long time before she called the number a friend from her old unit had given her, the one for a counselor who specialized in vets, and left a message asking to move her next appointment up. This ISN and Oppos' in the story to make Reese seem less capable. It and Oppos' S in the story because the version of this narrative that ends with the hero walking away unbothered, having enjoyed dispensing justice, is a version that quietly teaches something false. That competence in violence is free, that the people who are good at it feel nothing doing it, that the correct response to watching someone abuse power is to become, briefly, someone even more frightening than they were. Reese didn't and Oppose. T enjoy what she did that night. She did it because nobody else in the room was going to, and because Maya and Oppose. S tap had gone unanswered by everyone whose job it was to answer it, and somebody finally had to be the answer. That and Oppose. S a different kind of hero than the one this genre usually sells. It and Oppose, S the truer one. Ego builds elaborate kingdoms in small rooms, gyms, offices, group chats, family dinners, wherever a hierarchy exists and nobody in Oppose. S checked its credentials in a while. Those kingdoms hold up remarkably well right up until they meet something that doesn't in Oppose. T care about the hierarchy at all, and then they come apart faster than anyone inside them expected, because it turns out most of what held them together was everyone in Oppose. S collective agreement not to test it. Bullies like Trent Don in Oppose. T survive because they in Oppose. Re-strong. They survive because rooms full of people decide, individually and silently, that it and Oppose. S someone else in Oppose. S turn to say something. Every single person on that mat who looked away when Maya and Oppose. S hand hit the canvas made a choice even though it didn't and Oppose. T feel like one in the moment. Silence always feels like the absence of a choice. It ISN and Oppose T. The harder question this story leaves you with ISN and Oppose. T was Reese right to do what she did? It and Oppose. S the one usually left out of stories like this entirely. What does it cost the person willing to be the one who finally says something, and why does it so often have to cost them that much before anyone else in the room is willing to move? Maya got her blue belt. Trent lost 2 gyms. Marcus rewrote a policy he should have written years earlier. And Reese went back to training on Tuesday nights same as always because in the end that and Oppose. S what she and Oppose. D wanted from this gym in the first place. Somewhere that was just hers, uncomplicated, honest. It took one Thursday night to prove that the room hadn't and Oppose. T been honest at all. It took a lot longer than one night to make it that way again. Nobody claps for the part that comes after the fight ends. Maybe they should.